Okay, so here's where it starts. There's my camera. Here's where it starts. The human head. That's what we're going to start off. And once you understand how to sculpt a human head to a believable standard, we're not necessarily going for super hyper realistic because that's the whole thing on its own. But as soon as you understand how to sculpt a believable head, you are 90% of the way there to be able to then take that information into 2D, into other aspects of 3D, into other aspects of design. Try and think about the human head, the human body in general, as just another thing that is designed, another thing to design. But there are things within the human body, especially around the human head, that we're going to have to approach a little bit more scientifically, a little bit more technically, than something just as artistic as grab a piece of clay and start molding it into a head. Because obviously we're making characters for games, we're designing for games. We need to make sure that these things are both believable, in some way aesthetically appealing, if a negative character, a positive character, or anything like that. It's also very good for our observational skills as well, because obviously looking at the human head, we're going to have to break it down. We're going to have to look at all these different subjects and notice all these different parts of the human head that we all have, but are different from person to person. And hopefully you'll start to see that. You'll start to recognize more parts of the human head, aspects of the human body, aspects of the human head that are absolutely amazing. Obviously, you know me, I'm a big character person, but hopefully this will kind of show you as well that I'm in love with the human body. I think the human body is one of those most fascinating and beautiful things, with the way it's constructed, the way it builds, all the different parts, all the different things that make up. I mean, the things we're not going to look into are things like the endocrine system, the lymphatic system, nervous system, all that kind of stuff. We're obviously not going to look into that because there's no point. If you want to look into that the stuff is cool. I mean, it's incredibly fascinating. But what we're going to be looking at is more of like, superficial stuff. Muscle structures, bone structures, fat deposits, all that kind of jazz. And once you know how to do that, once you know how to sculpt and develop a recognizable, believable human head and body, you can then take that stuff into creature design, stylized stuff. It's why we're starting off realistic or believable and not going into stylization, because with stylization you always need to have a base of core understanding. You need to know what a human head looks like. You need to know the different aspects of it. Unless you're doing things which is just some really over the top basic stuff, that has no real ground with any kind of like technical 3D or anything like that. Then sure, you could argue that you don't need to know the human body, but then you're limiting yourself into a very, very small area. But then if you think about games like Valorant, Overwatch, CSGO, Rainbow Six Siege, Destiny, Elden Ring, Crash Bandicoot, Slime Rancher, the list goes on. Think about 90% of the games out there. They all have, in some form, a realistic character or a believable character. And I say things like, Crash Bandicoot, Spyro the Dragon, Medieval, all that kind of stuff, because they are either stylized characters or stylized animal characters. But again, there's this grounding in realism. The core knowledge, it might not necessarily be visible in the end product, but it's knowing things about the human head. It's knowing things about animals. It's knowing things about the real version of something, which then bleeds into your stylization and then makes your stuff even better. I've never met a person who is a professional character artist or creature artist who doesn't know the human body. It just doesn't exist. So once you understand the human head, you can then bend it to your whim. And once you understand the human body, you can then bend it to your whim. And you can start creating stuff like this. This isn't a particularly, difficult character. I had an idea in my head. I used Nomad to sculpt out a base, and I've taken it into ZBrush just to have a play, essentially. But it has all the hallmarks, all the features that you would expect to see on a human head in a character. Stuff that is recognizable. I would say, being the Dishonored fan that I am, I could very easily see this person in Dishonored with all the the stylization that I put into it. Obviously, I've accentuated some of the features. I've elongated them. I've made some smaller. I've really pushed some stuff. I've made some features that you really wouldn't see in a realistic person, or at least you wouldn't see it under normal lighting. You'd have to have like specific lighting to see it, because human skin is porous and it hides a lot of features and stuff. So to get here, we first need to start off with the base of all the human body, the base of all anatomy, the human skull. The human skull. So this is an asset that you can find inside ZBrush, and I've just basically ripped off the head. It's not a perfect realistic skull, but it's very, very close. And all I'm going to use this for is just pointing out some of the landmarks that we really need to know about. And I'm going to be using some spicy terms, some Latin terms, just because even though I'm not, I don't remember half the names of the human body. A lot of them are incredibly obnoxious Latin names that all have a meaning. Every kind of part of that name is a thing. It's kind of like a bit of a roadmap to where it is. But I use them in the head and in some parts of the body, just as a it's if I have that name in my head, I know exactly where it is, because it's such a weird name that it can only really originate in one place or be associated with one place. So the human skull, as a shape, as a thing to draw, it's just essentially like a modified sphere. That's where a lot of sculptors start off with. Most sculptors start off with a sphere, and then they start cutting bits off, pulling bits out. Essentially, we've got a modified sphere. But it's what is happening with the sphere, or what the sphere does to the overall structure of the head, which is what we want to think about, what we want to look at, what we want to be aware of. And I'm going to do a little bit of a draw over first, just to point some of these features out before we start actually looking at the zones. So I've got my magic pen here. We'll go for yellow. There we go. So the human head. And while I'm doing this, touch your own head as well. When we're talking about these features, touch your own head. We're all going to be different. We've all got different fat deposits, different muscular structures. Well, not different muscular structures, but different muscular kind of rhythms. So things might be a little bit different, but there are going to be, we all have skulls, and all our skulls have the exact same features. So I'm going to start from the very top of the head and basically move down. So the very top of the head, it's, if you feel your own head, unless you're incredibly overweight, this is going to be one of the thinnest parts of your head when it comes to skin to kind of flesh, tissue, muscle. There really isn't many muscles around there anyway. To then skull and that. It's one of the thinnest areas. So there's not really that much going up on there. This is where the skull really shapes the head a lot. All this kind of region here, it's all dominated by the skull. And like I said, from the skin to the actual skull is not that far, maybe a few millimeters, if that. So then when we move down, we're going to move down into the side of the head first. So again, if you just follow down, and I'm going to try not to bash the microphone too much when I do this. If you just follow your head down to the sides there, again, you're going to get to about where if you know where your temples are here, you're going to get to your temple area there. Some parts might be a bit squishy, especially around your temples. Don't push that too hard, obviously. But again, right here, it's still it's getting a tiny bit more fleshier, but it's still quite thin. Again, 2 or 3 millimeters at most. Now, when you come down to about here, this is where it starts to get a little bit more fleshier, going all the way around the head. There's a lot of fat deposit, there's a lot of muscles, there's a lot of flesh and tissue. So this is where some of the shapes start to come out. So obviously here we've got the ear, then we've got the chin. Nice and easy. But there's stuff at the front of the face which is interesting, we're going to talk about in a bit, and there's stuff at the back of the head around this middle area, which is quite interesting. So we move down, like I said, we've got the jaw. Now, this is really quite an important place for when we design characters 2D and 3D. That when we think back to shape language from visual design, this is a really nice thing to think about with a lot of character shape language. How do you dictate someone who's strong? How do you dictate someone who's soft? How do you dictate someone who's heroic? How do you dictate someone who's spineless? That kind of thing. A lot of it can be down to the jaw because it's a silhouette. If I do a quick old sketch here, Let's do a bit of a whoop head there. So I've got some kind of jawline there. Nice and easy. Now that looks, you know, quite strong, quite a square jawline. But if I get rid of that, and then I do something more like this, I'm changing it ever so slightly, and I'm making it a lot more pointier. So that we had like the last one, we had like quite a straight jawline. Now, because we've got like a bit of a curved jawline, you could say it's a little bit more model-like. It's a little bit more kind of heroic. But then if we again get rid of those areas, and we're only really changing one area, and then we do something like this instead, much softer, much more approachable, much more you know, if this was a character, this would be like the kind lumberjack in the forest or something. It would be the dad of the character or something like that. It would be a friendly character. And that's the difference between angles, slight angles, you know. An angle like that, an angle like that, and an angle like that. Very, very, very subtle. But a lot of this is dictated by the fat around here. And we'll talk about fat in a bit. This might be a bit of a long video, but you know, it's all about the fat here. I, once upon a time, had quite a nice jawline, but now obviously my older age is going. So around here, you have got, again, depending on the person, quite a lot of flesh. You have got quite big muscles here as well. I think they're called the masseter muscles. And they're the ones that allow us to open up our jaw. And if you tighten your jaw, just put your fingers inside your jaw there, you can actually feel them. You're going to have to make funny faces when you do it. You can feel them right there. Masseter muscles. That's why they call it masticating when you chew something, because it's being controlled by the masseter muscles. That's your jawline. Again, very simple shape, but a very kind of quite a important shape when it comes to, like, you know, the shape of the you know, design of a character. And then we'll be going down into the neck. If we just carry on down that way. And again, depending on what's happening in your jawline, depending on what's happening with the person's age, ethnicity, lifestyle, you might have quite a nice, sharp jaw. You know, quite a nice little balcony between end of jaw to neck. Or, for anything like me, you'll have a softer, you know, no real clear jawline shape. You'll have more of like a softer shape there, because you've got pads of fat and build up and muscle and stuff in that area. But again, you got to look at that area, look at that of your subjects. So that's that area of the neck. So now if we move to the front of the face, and I'll choose a different colour for this, I'll go for purple. In the front of the face, again, we'll start from the top of the head. Boop, like that. So at the top of the head, and we'll start moving down. So again, just like with the side of the head, as you go down, this doesn't really get any thicker. There's no more flesh here until you get to about here. Now in this region of the skull, we're going to start talking about regions in a bit. In this regions of the skull, there's actually quite a lot of information which helps to dictate a person's face. In fact, yeah, let's start getting some names of stuff started. So, right here, let's see, it's right there, like, boom. This whole section of skull is called the frontal, because it's the front, you know, the frontal lobe. There's muscles in there called the frontalis, because it's all in the front there. Now again, this is very different from person to person. I've got quite a dominant, quite a bulgy frontal lobe of my skull there, and I can actually trace, if I just feel around there, I can feel quite a sharp step there, and I can feel where it kind of like bends around here. So I've got like a loop of skull going around like there. And then you've got these now lovely little bits just at the side of your eyes here that I'm sure have some like obnoxious name in some book somewhere, but I call them the horns because they're like little horn shapes. And what they're really good at doing, and you'll see this in quite a lot of stylized characters, is dictating the shape of the outer eyelids, or the outer eye ridges here. And then it also gives you some nice shape to actually shape out this part of the forehead. But again, still quite a thin area until you get to like this region of the actual skull. Then that starts getting a bit more fatty. And again, if you poke around, carefully poke around your eye, you know, some of you might have very, very thin, tight eyes areas. Some of you might have quite soft and paddy eye areas because of the way your physiology works. And then we keep going down till we're going down the front of the head for now, and then we hit what we call the glabella, and it's this little notch, like little ridge here, just at the bottom of the, just here. It's called the glabella. Glabella. And again, you'll see this in tons of characters, and it's that, especially in anime characters. I will keep punching the mic by accident as well, don't worry. It's that region of the head. This region here. Glabella. You see it in a lot of anime characters. It's really good if you want to make someone look like oppressive, like a kingpin or some sort of like mafioso don-like person. Then you could make this like really, give him quite a small nose. If you make it paddy and fat and then have it really overhanging, and you got quite an intimidating person. But if you keep it nice and subtle, that's when you have like more of an approachable person. But again, it's an area that we really need to kind of look at and be aware of, because it'll also add dynamicism to a face. And if we don't have it, sometimes the face can, not that everyone does have, everyone has a glabella, but some people have more pronounced glabellas than others. If you have a person who's got quite a dynamic face and you don't give them that much of a glabella, it might make the whole thing look a bit flat. But then if you're trying to make someone look very soft and you give them quite a dominant glabella, then it makes them look very kind of strong. So please, there you go. Moving further down there, you got the nasal bone. Right there. And it's literally top of the nose. Right there. You can actually feel it. It's around where your glasses rest on your face. Again, keep punching the mic. Right there, you got two little ridges there. That's your nasal bone. Anything past that isn't actually bone. I really don't like touching it too much. It's called your septum. Your septum is like cartilage, which kind of sits like that. It's not actually bone; it's cartilage. So your actual nasal bone hits there. And if we go down, obviously, then you've got the pad of the nose that I'm going to draw in yellow. I'm going to draw the pad of the nose, or the actual nose itself. Now the nostrils as well, you might be able to feel this. The nostrils as well don't come all the way to the bottom of this nostril section here. They come just above the nostril section and then wrap around kind of into it. It's one of these things that the more you observe the human body, the human skull, different people's features, you'll notice certain things. The nostrils aren't rings like this if you're looking up at them. You don't have two nostrils like that on your nose. It's not what happens. You've actually got, it's almost like loops, especially if I draw it from kind of the side as well. So your nostrils come round and then go up into your nose, and these come down and join into your mouth like that, into your philtrum there. So the nostrils kind of come from about there, and again, if you feel very careful, you don't want to push it too hard. You can kind of feel that little bit of a ridge at the bottom of your nose, and you can kind of feel it tilting backwards as the skull obviously goes into the nasal cavity. So that's the gross part of the nose. And we come down, then we've got the mouth, the muzzle. Now, I I generally clump a lot of this stuff in as one group. There's this area, anyway, this upper mouth area. I think it's called the maxillae, because again, some of this information we don't really need. It's like pretentious. Yeah, the maxillae, left and right maxillae. It's Latin names. I'm going to call it pretentious. These people worked hard. They are just Latin names. But I guess technically the maxillae, I'm going to put it in yellow, is like this area here. I split down the middle in your philtrum. So the little ridge at the bottom of your nose there's called a philtrum. So you got a left maxillae and you got a right maxillae. And basically it's just this whole region here. So if you got your nasal bone right here and you've got your cheekbones here, we're going to talk about them in a bit. All this region going into like around here, it's all called your maxillae. I just call it your muzzle. You know. And I'm not going to draw any lips in for now, but I'll talk about the shape, the forms that are happening here. I'll put it in. Alright, pink. So around here, you got your muzzle. Now, what I really like people to think about at first with this area here is at first don't think about your lips. Almost imagine that your lips have been sealed, and this is just kind of like a mound, a shape. I sometimes call it the peanut for some reason, but you've basically got this shape which goes around your mouth. And the reason why this is important is because there's so much flesh around here. Unless you're incredibly thin, you've got an incredibly low fat index, and you don't drink enough water. If you're one of them people, then you will have very, very flat features here. If you think of people like Mad Mikkelsen, the actor Mad Mikkelsen, he's got a perfect example of this. Everything's very flat. But most other people, they've got, fat deposits. We've all got fat deposits there anyway. But you'll have flesh and tissue. You'll have fat. You'll have veins. There's tons of nerve endings and not arteries, like veins in that area of the face. It's why when you flush, you often flush around here. It's why when you're cold, your lips go blue. When you're hot, your lips go red. All that kind of jazz. But if we simplify it down to a shape, then you've got to think about from the bottom of the nose to the top of the chin. It's almost like a bit of a mound, like that, because all that fat is contained inside there. And if we go down to the very bottom, then you got the chin. And again, this is another. Some people have very bony chins. Some people have very fatty chins. I've got a kind of a middly chin. It's not very bony, not very fatty. But again, same jazz. If you feel, you can feel that hard bone in there. And if you feel, you can actually feel that there is a little bump in the middle of it. Like a little hole. And obviously, that then dictates the shape of the chin. Again, there's other things that might change the overall shape of this. What we're going to be looking at here is more like, the idealized perfect form kind of thing. And then we'll talk about how things added onto it will, change the shape. But right there, what we've got is a few fat deposits around there. Very simple. And then obviously, depending on your weight, fat deposits underneath. But, you got your chin right there. So let's talk about some zones of the head as well. So we've got the frontal lobe, going into your glabella, right there. Then you've got your nasal ridge, right here. Nasal ridge. Then you got your, we'll call it the muzzle. You get the muzzle. And then you've got the chin. Obviously, that's a nice easy one. Now around this area here of the face, from just underneath the eyes around to like this area here, there's actually quite a few things actually going on we'll talk about. So we've gone down the middle of the face. Now we're going to go down the middle of the face, but just to the side. So obviously it will go down the frontal lobe, and then we've obviously got those eyebrow ridges that we're talking about. And if you feel yours, mine are fairly flat. Like I said, I think it's because I've got more of a bulgy frontal lobe that I don't have particularly pronounced eye ridges or orbital ridges. You've got the orbital socket here of the head. Put this in yellow. the orbital socket, or your eye socket. And at the very top, you got your orbital ridge, right there, which goes down to your zygomatic ridge. And yeah, depending on, age, ethnicity. I think ethnicity is quite a big one for this as well, and age as well. So there's a combination of age and ethnicity, and just general genetics as well. Some people have got really, really bumpy. You see some skulls and they've got really pronounced orbital ridges. Some people have got very flat orbital ridges. And again, when you're designing characters, this is often a tool used to show, a person's intent. But then that, again, you can follow around your hand and just be careful. You follow that around and you can feel it go up underneath your eyeball. Let's pop myself in the eye a little bit. You can feel it go around underneath into your eye socket. Into your eye socket there. And there's tons of information happening around here that we'll talk about a little bit around, so I'm going to skip over that a little bit. Obviously, your eye in your eye socket plays quite a lot of shape control in this area. Obviously, you got your eyelids. It's not sat all the way in the back of your eye socket. It sits kind of out a little bit, and fat and skin build up around it. So then we go further down there, but then we've got the lower orbital socket, or the top of the cheekbone, right here. And this is a really nice place that I always tell people to really become familiar with. I'll kind of realize it's there. You probably know it's there already, but you've never kind of clicked onto it. If you just feel the skin underneath your lower eyeball, on your lower eyelid, you can feel it's quite elastic and quite, I'd call it quite moist. It feels different from the rest of your skin. But then if you just go a little bit lower, you can literally feel the transition from like one kind of skin to another. And that's because there's not really much fat on the lower eyelid there. Then when you go down into your cheek, that's where all the fat kind of builds up. And you kind of get this feels a bit more fleshier here, but this feels a lot more looser and elastic here. And that also traces the bottom of the eye socket there, the lower orbital ridge. You can feel it right there. And again, carefully, if you just move your finger closer to your eyeball, you can feel as it kind of goes into the eye socket. That's around there. Now, if you look at people from the side, this is a really, really interesting area. Obviously the eye ridge here is interesting, but here, this is where a lot of information often gets forgotten about, or not even considered for people who are new to drawing characters, or drawing people in general. So if we just have our person here, like that. So we have got our eye socket there coming in. That's our eyeball there. See our glabella. Your eye socket, or the lower, not your eye socket, the lower orbital ridge there, your cheekbone. If you look at someone from the side, especially if they're lit quite well, you can see where that flesh bends over the cheekbone, but then falls into the cheek towards the mandible. It actually comes backwards, like that. And that's because stuff underneath the face is controlling that information. It's something that I struggled with when I first started sculpting characters, and I thought I knew everything. That I always thought my characters had very, very full cheeks. I could never really quite control it until I actually sat down and looked at, I did some studying. I'd actually looked at how this kind of stuff works. And so instead of your cheek going down like that, because if your cheek just goes down like that, in a straight line from bottom of your eye down to here, what you're going to have is really, really big cheeks. But instead, if you have it going backwards like this towards the back of the jaw, as it does, you'll find that the shape of the face kind of becomes a lot more cleaner, a lot more kind of recognizable. So you've got that really lovely cheekbone section there. And then we go further down, then we're into the muzzle, we're into the maxilla. There's a portion here, I'll put that in blue so it's a bit more obvious. I said blue. There you go. There's a portion there which is interesting. It's around here. We'll not talk about it in this video, but there's a portion here we're going to look at when we look at mouths, which is very interesting, which has got stuff to do with like fat deposits around the face. And then we keep going further down. Then we've got it's still the jawbone, it's still the mandible. This whole lower jawbone here, this whole lower jawbone, it's one jawbone. It's called a mandible, really. Now, what we're looking at here is around here. And again, this is different from person to person. Here, we've got quite a heroic shape on this skull, because we've got this kind of like inward bend. And everyone has... I've got a skull in front of me. So this skull I've got in front of me, I've got like a little skull, has pretty much got the exact same shape. You can see there. There you go. Around there you can see that kind of shape. And mine kind of has it. I think everyone has it to a point. But, you know, you see skulls from people from around the world, and you see where some people are a lot more stronger, some people are a lot more thinner and bladier around there. Some people are very thick and kind of chunky bone around there. Again, it's all down to, you know, individuals, ethnicities, maybe diet, you know, all these kind of things go into it. But you've got this little bone here, I know you've got the bottom of the mandible. And again, depending on the fat deposits around the neck, this is a really nice place to define a character's kind of intent. Do you want it to be a very sexy character? Do you want it to be a very cute character? Do you want it to be very heroic, very aggressive? You can even do this when you do like bipedal creatures, or creatures that are a bit more humanoid. You know, you could use this kind of information to define certain things. Maybe take away this information. Again, with all this we're talking about, when you come into the realm of creature design, some of it's what you don't include. And if you understand that you're including something that is recognizable to a person, that's already given them a lock on something. Then you take away something else, you've already got that ground in there. But yeah, you get the bottom of the mandible there, nice and easy. Then we're going to move around to the side here. Again, we go down, same. Then we go to the temple. See, temple's there. Now here is where we get a few different. Muzzle. I'm just typing this mandible. Now here is where we get a few interesting things that have got annoying names, but they're actually really, really important parts of the body. Obviously, this is all where we normally look at people and characters. You know, this face, because it's what we look at with people. You don't generally look at a person's face there, but this region of the head is actually really important, because if you get this wrong, the whole thing just looks weird. It doesn't make sense, and then you'll be struggling for hours thinking like, why does this whole character look weird? Maybe you can't put your finger on it. So yeah, you've got your temple right there. And then you've got some horrible things. You've got an ethnoid and a sphenoid, which are the bones. Because if you look here, and if you look at my little dude, I don't know how well you're going to be able to see that. You can go behind the eye. There is a kind of a gap back there. And when you look at this example, or if you've got a skull of your own, look at that. And you'll see you can actually go behind this area here, because obviously there's tendons and blood vessels, all that kind of stuff going back there. And you got stuff called ethnoids and sphenoids. Tiny regions of the skull. We don't need to worry about them. They just sound cool. One region that we really need to think about is the temporal ridge. So I'm going to use blue for this. The temporal ridge. And that is this region here. Now, why is that important? Well, that's because the shape of the head is not a sphere when we're done with it. It's based off a sphere, but really what we're doing is we're chopping, there we go, we're chopping two sides of the sphere off to create the flat parts of the head here. We don't just make a sphere then pull out a chin. We really need to push these bits down. And the shape of the skull, if we look at it from the top, so my skull is now facing downwards, there, so you can see front of the face there. You can see there that the skull is actually wider at the back than it is at the front. And that's often a shock for people, because I think people think that we're wider at the front than at the back, or we're completely the same width going all the way down, and we're not. That's because this is why this region is so important. You've got a couple of things happening. You've got the temporal ridge here. Temporal because it's in your temple here, and it's a ridge because it's a ridge. You get the temporal ridge here, and that's actually going inwards. That's, you know, if I'm looking up in this case, it goes in, so it's actually thinning out. If this is the back of my head there you go. That's the back of my head there. You can see it's actually going inwards. It's getting thinner as it gets to the front of the face. It gets thinner. So that's one of the first things I do. I'll be flattening out that side of the head. And then when we go a little bit further down, then we get the zygomatic arch. So this is the temporal ridge. Then you get the zygomatic arch, and the zygomatic arch is technically all the way to here, right there. But I'm going to include it going all the way to the back of the ear, or this bit here. And it's a little, it's a ridge. It's a little bridge. You can see there, just outside of the skull. It's like a little bridge. It's a ridge, and it's your zygomatic. It's your zygomatic ridge, or your zygomatic arch. So it's this here. This whole region. Now that's the thing that gives the front of the face its width. You know, if my widest part of my face is there, and that's not being controlled by my temporal ridge, that's being controlled by my cheekbones. My zygomatic arch is there. See, I always yeah, that's it. Zygomatic arch. Zygomatic arch. Very, very important. Incredibly important for characters. Even your stylized characters. Again, unless you're going like super stylized, you'll always have some form of a zygomatic ridge. Even if you think about Merida from Brave, she's got a very round head, but she's still got a zygomatic form there. It's just a little more hidden because it's stylized. But then again, if you think about Mads Mikkelsen, look at his images. He's got a very prominent zygomatic arch. You know, you can see all that stuff there in his cheeks and stuff. And then when we go down, then you're in the cheekbone. Not the cheekbone, the mandible. In this case, all you got is the back of the mandible, which we've talked about at the beginning. It's that shape right there, and it's, you know, it can either be really sharp or really smooth. Dead easy. Now we're going to go back to the top of the head, and we're going to start moving backwards. And there's only really two areas, maybe three areas here that we need to think about. Number one, top of the head, is, so we've got the frontal part of the brain there, frontal part of the head. If you go backwards, then you got the parietal. So this whole area here, am I going to choose a new color? Orange, yeah. So bam, 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 bam. So this whole area here, it's called the parietal. See if I can spell this. I've actually got the spelling right up in front of me. For some reason, I always write it partial. Parietal. Again, stupid names. Stupid names. But again, like the fun thing about these names is they're all actually parietal. Nope. See, I've already spelled it wrong. They're all, especially when you come into the body, they're all basically a roadmap. So, for instance, you've got sternocleidomastoid. There's three terms in that: sternocleidomastoid, which is the sternocleidomastoid is this muscle. It's like a really dominant neck muscle there. It's each one of those names means something. I forget. Mastoid is the one you hear a lot of in the body, and it means something. But yeah, this is the parietal. Again, nothing really else going on back there. This is only fun when you've got what I call kingpin characters. You know, your fat mobster characters. Because then, just as you get to the bottom of the parietal, you can then start building up like fat deposits. So if you've got your mobster character here, and he's all, you know, fat, with a cigar in his mustache, in his mouth, on his small nose, you know, just at the back of the neck, you might start having the fat rolls. Very good. That's a parietal. But then when you start going down, and this is a fun one as well, if you just trace the back of your head, when you get to about here, if you can see that, when you get to about here, you'll be able to feel a little ridge. And some of you might know about this already. This might be a shocker to some of you. You got a little ridge back there. This is part of what we call the occipital, or the occipital. So I'll change it to a different color, change it to green. So this whole region here, including, you can't see it in this image. I'll show you when I've get rid of all these notes and turn the skull around. There's a little bit of a nubbly little nub back there. All this is called the occipital. Again, this is when I have to, I always call it an occipital, but it's an occipital. Occipi. Occipital, yeah. There you go. Occipital. Back of the head right there. And again, besides, if you've got anything like me, I keep chunking the thing. If you're anything like me and you carry a bit of weight, or if you want to design a character who's got a bit of weight, that's a great place to actually add that fat roll. You know, if you put your head back, you can feel the gathering fat rolls. It's amazing. But generally, not a lot of stuff going on there. It's a little bit thicker than the top of your head, but again, it's only like 2 or 3 millimeters at most of flesh. But then you feel it go away, and then you just feel muscles take over. But this does carry on to the spine, which we'll talk about in another video, but your spine is there. It connects to, if I draw in a skull here, connects to the underside, the middle of the head. Some people actually always put the spine like back here. That's like an animal spine. Our spines don't do that. Our spines connect to the middle of our neck, and it's why we have such range of motion with our heads, because it's literally in the middle, like that, so we can move our head around. So let's go over what we've just been looking at there, and let's talk about again why I have been talking about these names and stuff. So going from the front of the head here, you've got your frontal lobe here. That's very important because that's a very obvious subconscious shape that we look at for people in general. You know, some people have quite flat, especially if you're doing someone who's like a Neanderthal character, that's going to be quite flat. But some people have got quite flat frontals. Some people have got very bulgy, like me, I've got quite a bulgy frontal. Then you're going down, you've got your glabella, which is in between your eyelids there. Again, very, very important. We'll go on about this more and more when we do characters, but here is such a fun place for defining a person's emotion, or defining a person's, natural intent, if they're a good character, bad character, mean character, kind character, cute character, ugly character, old, young, or whatever. Then you've got your orbital ridges at the top here, which are the things that, when we're drawing characters, it's this bit here. It's that 3/4 view, what I call the C shape, where you've got a character from the side, then you got like a C shape going into the cheek. It's this region right here. That's the orbital ridge on the outside is creating that form. Again, if you overdo that and make it look too dominant, it looks weird. If you don't make it dominant enough, then it looks a bit soft and a bit weird. You lose the intent of the person. It all depends on the person that you're sculpting, or the character that you're designing. Then obviously we've got the orbital socket, which is your eye sockets. They're fairly uniform between people. Then you got your lower orbital ridges, or your cheekbones, right there. And like we said, they're generally covered in fat more, but they're forcing the shape of what's happening on top of the cheek. And you can feel that separation. You can actually feel the bottom of your eye socket there. Good little form. And then follow it up into your nasal ridge. Then you got your nasal ridge. Your nasal ridge is obviously the bridge of your nose where you rest your glasses, where the nose ends. The glabella starts, nose end around here. That easy. Going into the muzzle, which is all this general area here. Or the maxillae, as the stupid name is. And then you got your chin. Now your muzzle is a very good thing to look at for, again, character intent. I think that's why Mads Mikkelsen gets cast as the kind of characters he does. He doesn't get cast as not that I know of. He doesn't get cast as the Disney-fied, kid-friendly, hey, how you doing? Walter Goggins, same one. He's got a very, very similar face in this kind of vein where this whole lower area here is set up to be a villain. So yeah, really pay attention to what's going on there. But then you got people who are very warm and inviting. They will be designed with certain features, certain weights and masses around the face. It's all this subconscious. There's quite a lot of psychology in character design. Then you get down to your chin. Then you can go down to your mandible there. So obviously the back of your mandible. That's a really nice point there, because that's going to define the overall silhouette of the head from the front. And then from the side, obviously, you've got that nice separation. You know, if you want to make someone look very athletic and very kind of, you know, attractive, then you can kind of define that a bit more, have that nice sternocleidomastoid muscle. If you're trying to do someone who's a little bit more, if you think about actors like, no one will remember. There was an actor called John. Is an actor called John Candy? No, there was an actor called John Candy. Is an actor called John Candy? Can't remember if he's dead or not. But he's always been a big character. And again, it's this. He's got a mass around the bottom of his neck there. You cannot see his jawline. But we know it's there. And when we're sculpting these characters originally, we'd need to make sure we have that in there originally. And then we've got the temporal ridge here, which is really important because that's one of the defining shapes, again, psychologically, when we look at people. If we see a person whose head is the wrong if we're looking at sculpts anyway, if we see someone who's got the wrong shaped head, then you look at the sculpt and go, something's not quite right about that. You know, it could be this area, the temporal ridge, going into the zygomatic arch, which gives us the width of our face. And we'll get really used to remembering that this area here, the temporal ridge, comes in and gets thinner as it comes to the front of the face, whereas the zygomatic arches here give us the apparent width of our face. And then you go down into your mandible, and then around the back you've got your parietal, which is the back of your head, going down into your occipital, which is obviously the very back of the head, which then goes into the neck. Easy. Not that many zones of the head, but they're all incredibly important to know about. Didn't mean to do that. They're all incredibly important to know about. And again, you don't need to learn all these. I like to know these names because for me it's a nice jumping off point. You know, it helps me remember. But if you just remember these zones of the head, these are going to be very, very important and very, very helpful to you as well. Because when you look at a person, you can think, okay, I'm going to look at the frontal part of that person, and then I'm going to compare it to the frontal part of that person. I'm going to look at both these people's zygomatic arches. I'm going to look at both these people's temporal ridges. I'm going to look at both these people's glabellas. And you can compare and contrast, and you can see the differences between people. But the fact that we've all got these, there's very few things in the human body that are different, that only one person's got, another person, one type of person has got, another person hasn't got. And generally that's down to reproductive organs. You know, some people have penises, some people have vaginas, and then all the associated governments that come with it. Some people will have mammary glands, some people will not have mammary glands because they have a womb and a cervix, and then that's obviously the biological rhythm which generates that. You know, other than that, I think there's a few really weird things that are different between, male and female. But that's going to, like, you know, science book, you know, surgeon level stuff. The stuff that I'd never really bothered about. But this is really good to know about because all this information for the skull is the same for everyone. Absolutely everyone. And I would really advise you to spend some time with yourself, exploring your own skull, exploring your own head, feel all the different zones. And then it's a bit harder to ask, you know, then try and do that with another person. That might be a bit more difficult. But if you're able to, I mean, I've got a small one here, and obviously we've got the full-size ones at the school. This I got on Amazon a few years back. It was a tenner back then, but it's the exact same Frank that we've got at school. You know, it's the exact same skull. I think it is actually the exact same skull. But, you know, getting a good, if you get a little model skull, get a good one, get a scientific one. Don't get like a cosplay one or anything like that because they're always wrong. But if you get something like this, just feel it. You know, find the areas, you know, feel those areas of the skull. It might sound really hippy-dippy and weird, but there is an amount of tangibility that not just looking at a book is going to help you. You know, not just watching a couple of tutorials are going to help you. The fact that no one ever talks about, and I've not included them here because they're not regions of the skull, like big regions of the skull. But the fact that there's two little lumps on the forehead. Do that in a bit of a different colour there. There's two lumps like there and there. There's two ridges, and you can feel them right I can feel mine on mine, and they're literally there, just on the eye, on the outside of the eyebrow, the inside of the eyebrows there. I can feel mine quite well. Again, some people will have more pronounced, some people won't have, but on these, and I think Frank's is quite nice as well. Actually, you can feel them, and when I started using those a couple of years back within my sculpting, it actually helped me incredibly well in the initial parts of a sculpt to get the form of the skull in there. Sorry, I'm feeling it off camera, you can't see it. So around there, really, really nice. Again, those little horny sections where you can feel the lobe, the frontal lobe of the head, and you feel it kind of curve around into the top of the orbital ridges. Again, understanding, getting used to the thinness of the temporal ridge. That shape of where the cheekbones connect to the maxilla or the muzzle, and the fact that you've got this like little valley. Oh, you can see it. Well, you can see it. There you go. You got like a little valley between the cheekbone and the maxilla, which is what gives the shape of the head, and not just gives us fat face. You know, it's all incredibly important, and I do believe that it's that tangible nature of touch which allows us to, you know, really understand it. And then just study and study and study. Like I said, I advise getting stuff like this. I've also got like a little cast muscle and vein guy here, which is also very good. I think he was like 15 quid off Amazon. I got them both at the same time, about 2 or 3 years ago. So yeah, those are the reasons of the skull. I will obviously be putting up, or I have put up already, a much more cleaner version of this. But just getting an image of someone, drawing over those sort of regions of the head are all incredibly useful. Because if you can identify those different areas and actually really look at the shape of someone's jaw, the mandible, you know, not to mention things we've not talked about yet, people's maybe they've got some kind of deficiency, maybe they've got a overbite, maybe they've got an underbite, maybe they've not got any teeth and their jaw is actually collapsed. Sometimes when you see old men and old women with like really small jaws, they probably weren't like that for their entire life. When they lost their teeth and they got dentures, you know, if they keep their dentures out, their jaws kind of collapse because they push their jaw up, and it's why you get that like old man kind of face, kind of like what's going on here. You know, what's going on with the back of people's heads, what's going on with the occipital. Look at different regions of the world and skulls from there. So you look at like a European skull and then a like Far Eastern skull, China, Japan, Korea kind of skull, and then you look at regions of Africa skulls, because Africa's a massive place. Then you look at like South American skulls, and you look at, you know, like the far Russian kind of area, like towards Alaska, like where everything, like off in the boonies kind of thing. Anyway, just look at different skulls from different areas. You know, everyone's got the exact same skull. Like Frank is, I always thought he was an Asian skull, but I don't think he is. I think someone was lying to me back in the day. I think he's a Western skull. But like we were saying before, because he's looking down there, the back of the skull on this guy is wider than the front of his head. That's going to be common across everyone, but it's the length of the skull which is important as well. So our guy here, our guy here would have quite a prominent back of the skull there. But then if you take someone from China, there might be some. There's quite a lot of very round skulls there. Not a lot of that back of the head occipital kind of shape. But then if you look at maybe some German like descendant people, maybe not nowadays, but definitely like maybe 100 years ago, you would have quite a dominant occipital region of the skull. And it's fascinating. There's all these different regions of the world and all the different types of, you know, shapes there are. And that also makes it incredibly important if you're trying to design a person from such an area, that you don't give them like you are doing someone from China, but then you give them like a Western skull, and then everything just looks unbalanced because nothing fits together correctly. Or you don't give a person enough, you know. It's all about that balance. And then when you understand that, then when you go into stylization, you can start to take away, push, soften, accentuate certain things, go away. So, for instance, this guy, he's getting towards, like I said, it's getting towards the stylized bit here. This guy is an American hick, you know, Southern Lone Star drinking, that kind of thing. So I decided to kind of flatten the back of his skull, give him more of a rounder skull, but then push stuff forward. It doesn't look wrong. It looks obviously not realistic. It looks believable though. And then I'm playing with those areas. You know, I'm playing with. You can see here how the temporal ridge is coming in, and I have pushed it further than really what, like a little bit further than what realism would be. I brought it in a little bit further to bring in that upper head, makes his eyes a little bit closer together. And then I've got that cheekbone. So with that shape there, you can kind of see there's a bit of an S shape going on. Again, that's all the skull landmarks. Top of the head, back of the head, not a lot going on. Side of the head, not a lot going on. We can see there I've got that shape of the head. So we have got that like egg shape. It's smaller at the front, wider at the back. And then I was deciding to play with some other stuff. So in this case I've raised the nasal ridge. I've not really given him a glabella. So in this case I've flattened it a little bit. It still would be there, but I've got that nasal ridge right there. So it's a lot higher. About there actually. It's a lot higher than what we would have in real life. Is more along in line with the bottom of the eye socket. But again, this is kind of more stylized. I did have those little horn sections in there originally, but then I decided to get rid of them and flatten it out and actually make more of this shape. Again, those upper orbital ridge areas here. Top of the eyebrows. Make more of a point of that, because then that gives me that really lovely internal C shape there where the eye socket is, which is both that eye socket area there and the cheekbone area there. Decided to either take away all his teeth or give him dentures or something like that, but I shrunk his jaw, brought it forward, give him an overbite. Still give, because obviously he's a little bit on the thinner side. He's not a fat guy by any chance, by any state. But I decided to give him more of a sharper jaw and kind of a bit of a wider chin. His chin was really thin at one point. But then there's other stuff I'm playing with on top of that. I'm playing with the way that muscles are moving around the face. I'm playing with, you know, the landmarks of fat deposits, of flesh deposits. I'm playing with the sagginess of the skin. You know, he's not got a very nice jaw. He's thin, but his skin is sagging. You know, he's got that dropping Adam's apple. His ears are scuffed. I've not done his ears. And you can see that C shape we were talking about then. That like S shape coming in from the cheekbone down across there. Really want to play with that. So all of that just comes from the knowledge of the human head. And then when you take that into the body, the same stuff applies. So the human skull, it's the most important thing we'll be doing. Once you get the human head, everything else kind of like clicks into place. And there's all those regions. So let's just recap those regions again, just as the last thing to do to wrap up the video. So we've got the frontal, which is obviously this portion of the skull. Then you've got the parietal, which is the back of the head. So that's that region, and this is that region. Then you've got the occipital. Occipital. That's probably an A there, which is this region. Again, if you feel the back of your head, where the little knobbly bit is. Then you've got the temporal ridge. Always makes me think about deep fried shrimp. Tempura. There you go. Which is that bit here, which is this zone. So there are all the easy parts, all the big flat parts. Then we go into stuff like the mandible. The mandible is the entire lower jaw. So it's a mandible. God, dyslexia kicks in with these names. Mandible, I think it is. Mandible. A mandible. Whatever. Then you got the zygomatic arch, so I'm just going to define it from here. So this region. Zygomatic. Arch. The nasal bone, or the glabella. We'll do the glabella first. Glabella. Then the nasal bone. Nasal bone, nasal ridge, nasal bridge, same thing. We'll call it the muzzle, but it's this whole region here. But in the real world, it's called the maxilla. The muzzle. And then if we just go up to the very top, and we'll just mark these in different colour because they're mixing in with the white now. We've got the right there. These are called the orbital ridge. Ridge. Got the horns. I'll do that in a different colour actually. Actually no, I'll leave them off because I like more whatever. Okay. So those are all the main regions of the head. Like I was just about to go into then, there's other smaller stuff, but then that's again a bit too much at this point. You know, we're just hitting an hour now. So yeah, when we come into actually sculpting the head, once we understand these reasons of the skull, the head actually gets really easy to sculpt. So hopefully you've made all those notes, so I'll get rid of like that. Cool. So yeah, you can see there, just to reiterate, we've got the occipital bone just kind of sticking out, the little nub. That's the bit of the back of your head you can kind of feel. You can see here that they've chosen to give the skull quite a thin jaw. And there are no jaws which are like 6 inches wide or anything like that. All jaws, all mandibles are fairly, although thinking that mine is quite thick actually, that are fairly kind of thinnish compared to everything else. But unless you're doing a skull, that's not that important. And then that important C shape I've been talking about is here, where you've got obviously the horn shapes coming into the orbital ridge. That gives you that upper eyebrow shape. Not to mention any fat deposits put on top of there. And then you got the two little nubs around here, which then lend to, you know, what's going on in the middle of the forehead here. You know, if you feel around there, you might be able to feel I've got anyway, a little bit of an indentation. But yeah, them two little nubs there help towards the fatness of that region of the head. Then obviously the zygomatic arch helps to widen the cheeks, giving us that C shape, which I'm a massive fan of. It's one of my favourite parts of portraiture, not just characters, just in general. It's one of my favourite parts of the human head, I think. I like that shape. And then from there, you've got the really important flow from the lower cheekbone, or the cheekbone, into the cheek, into the mandible, which, like I said, I used to just go straight like that and wonder why all my characters had like really fat cheeks, when really it's what gives us from our near side here facing towards us, it's what gives us that shape like that coming out of our cheek. But then from a 3/4 view, it's what gives us that kind of shape, that indentation within the cheek. It's the fact that the muscles and the fat is going across rather than down, which then outlines our laugh lines for older characters. But then that's all being controlled by the cheek. And then you got stuff like the masseter muscles, like we were just talking about before, masseter muscles there. And then also around here, there's, because you got your eyeballs in your eye sockets, you've also got, depending on the person, you've also like, this all flows into this area. You've got fat deposit, which might, appear, which then add a little bit more softness to that area. Maybe you've got, which we've got on my dude here. Maybe you've got like an asymmetrical thing going on, which kind of changes stuff. Cool. And then you've got, obviously, your nose. And your nostrils, like your nasal labial folds, which is a great term. Around there. Now your ears. Well, in this area, it's quite fun because you've got this little hole right here. And that's where your ear hole goes into. It goes into your head. So that's where your ear hole is, but your ear is actually up, like here. Your ear lines up with this, and your ear is behind. So if you have a skull here, your ear is behind the halfway line. So it's on the back half of the head. Absolutely fascinating. And then you've got, there you go. Flip around that, it's easy for me to draw like that. There you go. Then you've got areas, obviously around your chin, around your jawline, that kind of stuff, which is obviously going to help you define so many different things. And this is actually really nice to look at with people as well, because you've got people who've got thin lips and thin chins, but then you've got people who've got like really slope, it goes in and it goes out like that. Some people have got, oops, lower lips, which basically just become chins, and there's no real definition change right here. Because I think what we're all kind of guilty of is doing the whole anime lip thing and just doing that, which is fine. A lot of people have that, but then you've got some people who have more like this. There's not really that much definition. Some people I've met in my life have actually just got like straight up, because their lower lip almost like disappears into it rolls back into the lips essentially. So, but then you still have some kind of like chin information there. But then you got your jawline, another thing to think about. So I'll do another color for this, orange. So I got your jawline there. You can do your sexy, husbando kind of characters. We've got really chiseled jawline and big sternocleidomastoid muscles and massive Adam's apple for some reason, like that. That's all well and good. But then when you're doing real characters, believable characters, more relatable characters, then there's other stuff you can think about. So yes, you have got a jawline, and unless you're really overweight, you can all feel your jaw. I can feel mine quite well. But then you've got like fat deposits which can fit underneath there, that soften that shape a little bit. Maybe you've got a little bit of excess subcutaneous fat, basically fat deposits underneath your jaw there, which will then go into making that a lot far less of a chiseled line. If I'm making a character from scratch, I'm probably going to start off with a chiseled jaw and then fill up from there, rather than trying to get that kind of shape in there immediately. I like getting the skull in there first, because I can do it quickly, and then I can move on to everything else later on, because I got the base there. I'm laying my baseline. And then obviously if you're doing a character which is quite big, then you can think about fat rolls at the back. There's no point doing a person who's fat at the front and then thin at the back. Doesn't make any sense. So yeah, there's tons of stuff we can do and think about once we know all the reasons of the skull. Again, do you need to know all the names? No, at all, not at all. But knowing the zones is important. Knowing all those regions is important because they're just landmarks. You know, they're basically our roadmap to making the skull look good. So I'm going to leave it there. And the next video is going to be on about zones of the face. Like, we're talking about muscles and how much more into how the skull impacts the face, shapes the face. But just for like the overview of the skull, that one's that. And like I said, this is a long one as per usual, you know me, but I will be making a PDF for this, just going over all the different areas. It'll just be names and colours, that's all. So cool. In a bit.